Loki kills the Avengers in Marvel Comics, and those aren't the only ones. He kills a bunch of other people too. This story is amazing. So this story literally opens up with Loki explaining how he's captured or killed every single Avenger in the universe. And what he does is he chains up the hammer of Thor. We'll find out what happened to Thor here in a little while. Captain America, who was frozen in ice and never discovered, was tossed into Jotunheim, the land of the frost giants. Tony Stark is stuck in a prison and he's basically an alcoholic. This guy killed every single Inhuman on the planet, which is fine because nobody cares about them. He sacked Wakanda. He sent anybody who was a Ghost Rider off to Muspelheim, the land of Surtur, which is basically the Asgardian version of hell. And then he killed every single other person on Earth with powers. The X-Men, Alpha Flight, the whole 9 yards. So the question has to be asked, why in the world is he even doing this in the first place? So the thing to understand about this version of Loki is that in the reality that he lives in, Thor did exist, but died as a child. And in fact, he died when he was first trying to learn how to use his hammer. It flew him into the sun and it killed him. And so Loki, in turn, seized control of the Asgardian throne of Asgard. He had Odin shipped off as a slave to Jotunheim, the land of the frost giants, where he presumably stayed evermore. But then Loki, in turn, realized there was no sense of fulfillment here. And so what he did is he started reaching out to different iterations of himself across the multiverse. And for a time, they would talk and have conversations and so on, but almost immediately after meeting each other, that alternate reality version of Loki would try to kill him, because that's what Lokis do. And that's what this version of Loki started to realize. Every alternate reality version of himself that he met was just a crazy guy who tried to kill anybody that he perceived to be a threat. So then he started asking the question, am I like this in every other universe? So then he started leaving his universe and traveling to other realities and secretly spying on those alternate versions of Loki. And this did two things. Number one, it confirmed he is a villain in pretty much every universe in the multiverse. And number two, he's always defeated by the Avengers. Not only that, he's the reason why the Avengers even come together in the first place. And so in order to solidify his rule over Earth and eliminate anybody who would stand in his way, he killed all the different Avengers and pretty much every superpowered being on Earth. Here's the kicker to this. Loki failed to realize that he himself was not the only threat that the Avengers had to face off against over the course of their time on Earth in any one particular universe. They would also have to face off against Galactus and the Celestials, Thanos with or without the Infinity Gauntlet, Red Skull with a Cosmic Cube, Gore the God Butcher. Now, despite how it's depicted here, I doubt all these guys showed up on Earth at one time to fight Loki. It would be amazing if they did, but what Loki says is through his power of mysticism, which is astronomical, he wiped these guys out. Now, assuming he became the new Sorcerer Supreme after presumably killing Doctor Strange, that's entirely possible because people underestimate how insanely powerful Stephen Strange is. But in doing this, Loki started to realize he became the very villain that he despised the most. So he tried to kill himself. He literally flew into the sun because his rationale was if the sun killed Thor, the sun would kill him. And it did. Then he wakes up in the God Quarry. What's the God Quarry? So the God Quarry is both a source of godlike power as well as the home of the multiversal Infinity Stones. The way this works in Marvel is that those gods and goddesses out there who exist, when they die, their bodies travel to the God Quarry and it serves as a kind of graveyard. But within the quarry itself resides the first firmament, also known as the first universe. The power of the first firmament is astronomical. It certainly exceeds the abilities of any Infinity Gauntlet in any one particular universe, and the power of the first firmament may very well even exceed the power of the living tribunal. But within the God Quarry is also the multiversal Infinity Stones, which is to say that when the multiverse came into existence, the stones came into existence in the quarry and they were dispersed across the multiverse, which is how you get an Infinity Stones in every different reality. Now, those individuals who approach the God Quarry and try to attain its power will be given a test. If they fail, they'll return to stone and trapped forever. If they succeed, they'll attain the power of the first firmament and effectively become God. Loki's not really looking for either, and in fact, he's really just looking to die here, but the God Quarry rejects his attempts to die, and then he realizes he's effectively stuck here. And so in coming to the realization that he's always the reason why the Avengers assemble, even if for no other reason than to somehow defeat him, he decides he should start forming a multiversal Avengers team should anything go awry within the multiverse that would lead to a team of that caliber. Now, this initially started out with what were called the Deathlocks, which is to say some individual seeking the God Quarry lands here or stumbles across this place not knowing what it is. They're essentially trapped and they ultimately die. Loki would resurrect them using his extreme power and then would turn them into a kind of cyborg, and they would go out into the multiverse as a kind of police officer patrolling their own individual sector. But what ended up happening here is that in an alternate universe, a version of Doctor Doom started working with a version of Mephisto. And what they did is they started building a team that would serve the purpose of going from one reality to the next and destroying the Avengers on that world. Specifically, what were called the Primordial Avengers. Why were they called that? Because in Marvel Comics, one of the other additions they have when it comes to the Avengers is that you had what were called Avengers 1 million BC, which is to say a team with like Odin and the Phoenix Force, the very first Black Panther, and that team basically set the groundwork for what would later become the Avengers in the modern era. If that team's destroyed, the Avengers never exist, and the Earth falls to a terrible fate. And that's what Doctor Doom and his guys were doing. They were killing the old Avengers from 1 million BC and preventing the rise of superheroes in the modern era. Now, what ends up going on is that Loki starts to realize what's happening across the multiverse. This initially happens when a portion of Doctor Doom's army invades the God Quarry seeking to attain the power of the first firmament. Loki responds, obliterates all these guys, and then goes into the multiverse to find out what's going on. He's ultimately trapped by different versions of Mephisto known as the Council of Red, and he pretty much overpowers all of them and then is able to take them out. It's not the entire council, but a pretty good chunk of it, which killing multiple versions of Mephisto at one time is pretty astronomical in terms of power. But in returning to the God Quarry, he's met with the multiversal Avengers that have been recruited by the surviving Deathlocks that hadn't been destroyed by Doctor Doom's forces. And so the team does not trust Loki because in their mind, he's just a version of Loki who always does what Loki does. But what he ends up doing is spilling the beans to the entirety of the Avengers in the hopes that they would somehow learn to trust him. And ultimately what they end up realizing is he's their only real chance at being able to defeat the forces of Doctor Doom. That without this version of Loki, effectively all hope is lost. And so what they end up doing is trusting him tentatively, but in order to build that trust up, Loki actually expands the roster of the Avengers. He ends up bringing in all these variants of Avengers from across the multiverse by opening a portal, which looks astonishingly similar to the one that Doctor Strange uses in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so what you get is this colossal multiversal Avengers team led by Loki, now operating under the name Avengers Prime, that are running headlong into a war against the forces of Doctor Doom and his entire army of antithesis villains to the Avengers. With that being said, we're going to bring this to an end. If you guys want to get caught up on everything related to the Avengers, make sure you guys click the link to this video, and I will catch you all later. Peace.